is there a danger because I think you look around in many industries and many places where you see behavior that many of us could sort of shake our head and say, what's happening? Like from Capitol Hill and, the new norm of politicians sort of like divesting themselves of polite rules of engagement or even sometimes ethical and honest rules of engagement to the crisis that we see happening on some college campuses with college-age students, going straight to what we would call aggressive, in some cases criminal behavior. But is there a danger, do you think, of over explaining some of this behavior by the peer effect? Do you think that when you look at those examples I just gave you, do you think, if they just mixed in some, if they just empowered some other diverse viewpoints or took out a couple of those poor actors, everything would go back to normal? Is there any danger into over-indexing how much this is
Yeah,
effect?
I mean, I don't want to go so far to say peers are the only thing that matter, but I think it's the other way. We don't look at peers nearly enough. I mean, if we look at, you bring up Congress and then the behavior of these guys, and this kind of goes back to the Tea Party, right? And they brought in all these new junior Congress people came in with very similar ideas and similar, very combative attitudes, and the kind of genteel discourse in a way of the 80s gave way to this, and what we see today is just ramping that up even more, and and that was something growing up, you would never have seen that, no one would have done that, and on the floor of Congress, and now it's a regular everyday occurrence. Nobody would have shouted at the president, right, in a thing. So I think there is a peer effect there, right? There is this kind of echo chamber of people with their ideas and their attitudes, and you see it playing out at the local levels too, right? At school board meetings where people just angrily get up and yelling in a way that they never would, because they're with other like-minded people like them. And then you see it in sometimes in voting patterns too. I mean, you look at a place like the Villages in Florida, right? This retirement, really super large retirement community, really a city. It's over 100,000 people live there, and it's something like 90% people voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Right? It's where do you find those kinds of numbers? But I mean, you think about the structure of the Villages. It's upper middle class, almost all white people who retired, so they have a lot of time on their hands, play golf and tennis, and in between they're talking politics and watching Fox News and Breitbart and getting their information from the same places, and also this splintering of information into different types of groups. I mean, growing up, you had a handful of channels and a handful of newspapers, and we agreed on the facts and we differed on interpretation, but now we can't even agree on the facts.
Yeah.
Alternate facts are being presented, and that's because we're splintered into groups in a way that we weren't necessarily. I mean, we've always had groups, obviously, but the way that we receive and process information is through these kind of peer groups in a way that it wasn't necessarily before.
So let me see if I understand. So it's that, because in the news, for example, I would argue, more diversity of thought now because there's more access to blogs and different kinds of media. Wow, I just dated myself by saying blogs, but you know what I mean. But I think what I'm understanding you're saying is that diversity is in a silo. So instead of it being, to think about your example of corporations where you bring in more women and more people of color that are all working together, this is there may be more diversity, but they're not intermingling. That it's just sort of siloed, and that's what's making this peer effect magnified in the way people are consuming news. Am I understanding your argument correctly?
Yes, I think that's right. And we had silos before, but they weren't as strict, right? They were looser. Like you could come in and out of them more easily. Whereas I think now the silos are a little bit more bounded, right? Like you're here, and these are your people, and this is what we talk about, and this is how we live. And if you differ on certain things, like, you know, some things are not super important to people. It's like, well, you know, like maybe religion isn't that important in discussion, right? Differences between Protestants and Catholics or whatever. But, you know, things like, you know, your feelings about transgender kids, right? Like you can't be for transgender kids if you're in this silo, right? Or you can't say, well, you know, I don't think transgender kids play in sports if you're, you know, kind of exist in this silo over here. So there's a more uniformity, I think,